We're behind you. I want to thank Kyodo Taiko for the wonderful performance. Hello, everyone. My name is Pat Sakamoto, and I would like to welcome you all of you here for making this long trip to honor all who survived life behind barbed wire. 76 years ago, President Roosevelt signed EO 9066, which forced the removal of all people of Japanese ancestry. One of them was my mother, and that's why I'm here representing my mother and to honor her. My mom would never talk about her experience here, so I'm really glad you've all come to make this trip and learn about what happened during those camp days. Not all of them were fun and games. My mother, I think because of the questionnaire 2728, it split her family up. My mother said yes, yes, and my father said no, no. So I never met my father, and my mother was pregnant with me at the time. And I think the same thing is happening now in our present day. Families being split up. And I would like for all of us to fight against that. Anyway, let's start the program. I'd like to introduce Kathy Jefferson Bancroft. She is one of the leading persons who stopped the DWP from installing solar panels, which destroyed the entire environment surrounding Manzanar. And here she is.
Manahu, Inania ne Kathy Jefferson Bancroft, Numanu, Paya Hunado, where Nu Kimadu. My name is Kathy Jefferson Bancroft, and I'm the Tribal Historic Preservation Officer for the Lone Pine Paiute-Shoshone Reservation. Our reservation lies just to the south of here. It's a small piece of land that was traded by the federal government with LADWP as a place for us to live and use. Not too many years before that, the Numanu, my people, lived everywhere your eyes can see from here. Now, we never have given up our right to claim this land as our traditional homeland, and we would like to officially welcome you to Paihahunadu. We feel a connection to the people who were placed on this piece of land during World War II, not only because of the connection to this place, but because we share many of the same experiences and concerns. Our water and land and all living cultural resources and beings have been under attack for the last 100 years. Part of the reason for this has been able to happen is because the true history has never been acknowledged. We change history. To change history, we have to change the stories. The stories must be told so the young can understand and correct the injustices. We must never forget that we are the strong who have and will survive and teach the world to be a better place. We want to express our gratitude for the continued efforts of people like Sue Embrey and all the other camp survivors and all of you here today to ensure that the true history is never forgotten and people from all walks of life must be not only accepted but appreciated for their contributions and values that make us all better people. So thank you for everything and have a great day.
Thank you, Kathy. I'd like to next introduce Bernadette Johnson, the superintendent of the Manzanar National Historic Site.
I'm going to have to tiptoe. Thank you. So welcome to Manzanar National Historic Site. It's great to see so many of you here today. I am always inspired by seeing multi-generations here, and I appreciate that everyone has made this journey today. From the National Park Service, I just really want to say how humbled and grateful we are that many of those incarcerated, many of your friends, many of your families, and many of you have entrusted us with taking care of this very important story. As I look back and I think about the 30th anniversary of the Civil Liberties Act, many of you fought that fight so hard, and you're continuing to fight the fight for social and human justice. So thank you so much. Please applaud yourselves for all that great work that you've done. We're really appreciative that we have such a great relationship with the Manzanar Committee, and thank you so much, Manzanar Committee, for being here and bringing everybody together. If you see a park ranger, please tell them thank you, because they're here to support the Manzanar Committee, make today a very good day for you. And thank you for coming. Last year, 114,000 people came to Manzanar. That's pretty impressive. Every day we see people coming. One day right before Easter Sunday, we had 900 people in one day. This will be a record day for us too, for this month. So anyway, please be safe, and thank you for coming today.
Thank you, Bernadette. I'd like to acknowledge some of the elected officials from the Valley here, from Inyo County Board of Supervisors, Jeff Griffiths, Matt Kingsley, and Inyo County Clerk Registrar Recorder Cami Foote, and Gardena Mayor Tasha Serta, I'd next like to introduce Karen Umemoto, Director of Asian American Studies Center at UCLA. I'd like to make a little introduction. UCLA has played an indispensable role in the understanding of what the Japanese community went through. Karen has a special connection to Manzanar as her father, Hank Umemoto, and I think I saw him out there, spent his teenage years here and authored an amazing book, Nisei Hiker.
It's great to see the pilgrimage grow over the decades, and I really want to thank the Manzanar Pilgrimage Committee for its tireless work, and to the National Park Service for continuing the preservation of the site, as well as a perpetuation of our history. To all of you, we are very grateful. Why do we come to Manzanar? And what is the significance of the pilgrimage in these times? I know it's different for all of us. For me, my dad brought us to Manzanar when we were little, and every so often after that. And he would always start out by saying that this was a land of the Paiute Indians, and I appreciate the opening words, for they had it so much harder than Japanese Americans throughout American history. He used to bring us, when we were growing up, all of our friends were going to Disneyland and we were coming to the desert, and I kept wondering, why are we coming to the desert when everybody else is going to Disneyland? But it was actually because his years during internment were so impactful on his life. And for him, his high school years here were quite memorable in a positive way. On the other hand, my grandmother's family, who was in Tule Lake, had a very difficult time. She went into depression. My grandfather died of stomach cancer, they said, from drinking too much bootleg rice wine in camp. So there are very different experiences, but regardless of every individual's experiences, we come here to honor all of their experiences as they endured the forced expulsion and, most of all, denial of civil liberties and civil rights. It's significant that you are all here today, for these are not normal times. The parallels between the days of war hysteria and today, unfortunately, are becoming clearer as with each passing month. In particular, I'm really concerned about the belief, the widespread belief in things untrue. Beliefs that stray from the fundamental facts. From back then, the idea that Japanese Americans were a military threat or a threat to our national security. Today, beliefs such as the climate is not changing, or Mexicans are thieves and rapists. The following of false gods is reminiscent to that of an earlier time that resulted in, among other travesties, the mass incarceration of Americans of Japanese ancestry. The political mobilization of racial animus and religious hatred may ring a very similar tone today, but one thing is different. We know better. Japanese Americans back then had few friends, few political allies to come to their defense. Part of our legacy, and for me personally as a Japanese American, I feel that part of my legacy is and the lessons of the camps is to take the mantle of justice and defend the civil rights and civil liberties of any group that faces injustice and attack. For this, we come to Manzanar to pay tribute to those who have come before us and to renew our commitment to making sure such a travesty is never repeated to anyone, from any place, at any time. May today be a day we join together across generations, across color lines, and across humanity so that we can support each other in our long march on the road to social justice and true democracy. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Karen, for sharing your stories about your father. Lauren Matsumoto from the UC San Diego Nikkei Student Union.
Hello everyone and good afternoon. My name is Lauren Matsumoto and I'm from the UC San Diego Nikkei Student Union, as well as one of this year's organizers for Manzanar at Dusk. I'm sure many of us here can agree that we're always on a journey to learn more about ourselves and to understand our identity. As a fourth generation Japanese American, I like to give a shout out to all the Yonsei who are here today, as well as a third, fourth generation Chinese American. Manzanar plays an important role on my journey. The first time I ever was part of the Manzanar pilgrimage, I was in high school and I came with my dad. Even though my grandparents, Bob Matsumoto, who was incarcerated at Tule Lake, and my grandmother Jane Adachi, who was incarcerated at Gila River, were never personally imprisoned here at Manzanar, my dad and I understood that it was important to take time to be a part of this trek to one of the concentration camps, and to reflect on how the 3 years my grandparents were imprisoned had scarred them so greatly to have also impacted my dad and I and shaped who we are today. When I first arrived to the pilgrimage, I was moved by the vast number of people who decided to come out here to share their stories and for others to learn more about what happened here and to learn about the American stories that we never listen and we never hear in history classes. I believe there's always something more we can learn, especially on the land, on where it happened. This is something that I felt when I took part of this year's pilot program, Keeping Japanese American Incarceration Stories Alive, that was organized by the Manzanar Committee as well as the Manzanar Historic National Site. I strongly encourage to keep these kinds of programs alive so that so many others can have the same opportunity that I did to learn more about the American stories that need to be heard and to be preserved, as well as learning about our history is the first step in never letting it happen again. I can see that there are parallels between the justice faced in 1942 to the Japanese American community, as well as the current injustice faced by a Muslim community. It is difficult to combat xenophobia, racism, Islamophobia by ourselves, so that is why it is very important that we stay vigilant and support our neighboring communities today during this current political climate. It is important that we are continuously discussing ways to preserve our history, share stories, and to speak up. So tonight, organized by the Nikkei student unions of UC San Diego, UC Los Angeles, Cal Poly Pomona, and Cal State Long Beach, along with the Manzanar Committee, we invite everyone here today to continue this discussion at Manzanar at Dusk, which will be held at 5 p.m. at Lone Pine High School. During this time, we will have student and community activists speak on a panel about their past and current experiences. Afterwards, those who have joined us will be given the space to reflect on their time at Manzanar and at the pilgrimage, as well as to tell their own stories. Everyone from all ages and backgrounds are welcomed. We especially encourage from former Nikkei incarceree and their families to join us to continue the dialogue and to pass on their stories. Again, we hope to see everyone tonight at 5 p.m. at Lone Pine High School in Manzanar at Dusk. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. How are you all doing? Good? Like she said, my name is Yusra. I'm from the Council on American-Islamic Relations. Yeah, sure. Now, I won't repeat my last name, not because I think it's too difficult for anyone to pronounce, but because my first name already means so much. You see, my first name means, it refers to the ease that comes after hardship. It's the word that is used in the Quran. And for me, my name carries so much for my identity, my history, and for us as Muslims. And it's this type of ease, the type that comes when allies create a circle of love around Muslims who are protesting outside of LAX after the first executive order for the Muslim ban was passed. That's the type of ease I'm talking about. So growing up, I hated my name. Nobody tried to pronounce it the right way. Nobody could. And I understand. It's hard. It's hard when you don't know something. It's something new, right? But the worst name I have ever been called is Israel, which is the colonial project that stole Palestine. But I will not allow my name to be stolen from me, because my name can be pronounced, and because I value who I am and where I come from. The reason why people may, change my name, or it's hard to change it, but if, people, change my name or not pronounce it right, is because it's easier to kind of erase or change what you don't know. And it's the same thing with here that where we're at with Manzanar, right? Like, it's easy to erase or to put away something or a group of people that you just don't understand. So we have to recognize the significance of our names and make sure that our names are heard. Because when I'm telling you my name, I'm telling you the message that my life is speaking into my name, and the message that my name is speaking into my life. So there's this hadith, which is like a saying of the beloved Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, where he says that, keep good names, because on the day of judgment you will be called by the names, and it will be proclaimed, so-and-so, son of so-and-so, rise and get associated with your light. And so when we introduce each other by our names, we're also sharing a unique experience of our life, and where we illuminate our understanding of the world and those in it. So as we stand here today remembering Manzanar, what happened here and those who suffered not only in the incarceration camps, but in camps across America, I invite you to learn the names of someone new. Because building genuine relationships across communities is a form of resistance. The more we know each other on a personal level, the more we will fight for one another on a deeper level. Relationships empower us to unite against a common enemy, systems of oppression. So I'd like everyone to just take a moment to get to know someone that you don't know next to you. And I'll give you all a moment to just do that. People you don't know, not people you know. Yeah, I saw that. That was nice. So I don't want to take too much time from the Manzanar committee, but I hope that you all continue these conversations afterwards. After today ends, after the program ends, please really get to know someone who's outside of your identity bracket. So if you're a Muslim American woman, I hope that you get to know someone who is a Japanese American male. So please really get outside of that bubble. And I guess just to clarify, I don't get offended if no one can pronounce my name. I'd be more than happy if people came and introduced themselves to me. And my full name is Yusra Amir Khafagi. Thank you all so much for having me.
Thank you, Yusra. Okay, I'd like to introduce Ann Burroughs next. She's the president and CEO of JANM, the Japanese American National Museum. She, which has a long history working for human rights. Oh, she has had a long Sorry. Okay, it's hard to read this. Has a long history working for human rights and racial and social justice, going back to her native South Africa, where she fought against apartheid. And here she is, Ann Burroughs.
Thank you. Thank you to the Manzanar Committee for inviting me to speak today. I'm so honored. I'm so honored to be with you all. I'm so honored to be representing JANM, our leadership, our volunteers, our staff, and our members and supporters across the whole country. And it's, of course, profoundly moving to be with you on this 49th annual Manzanar pilgrimage, and particularly in this year of the 30th anniversary of the American Civil Liberties Act of 1988. Silent no more. Liberty and justice for all. At this time, I can't think of a theme that could be more powerful and more urgent and more relevant at this moment, when the democracy and the human rights in this country are being threatened, and when our obligation to shine a light on what can happen when any community is scapegoated and persecuted could not be more urgent. Over the years, before joining the team of JANM, I visited the museum frequently, and I've always been keenly aware of how powerfully the Japanese-American experience has resonated with my own values and lifelong commitment to human rights and justice. But it was really only when I joined the staff almost 18 months ago now that I began to fully understand the dedication, commitment, and sheer collective will of an entire community to preserving the legacy and to ensuring that the Japanese-American experience is never forgotten and never repeated. I found there were strong similarities and echoes with the path that I've taken in my own life and the values that have driven the choices that I've made. When I was in my 20s in my native South Africa during those very, very dark days of apartheid, I joined the resistance movement to fight for democracy, for justice, and against the policies of racial segregation that were the laws of the land. It was an extraordinarily difficult time that carried enormous uncertainty and enormous fear. We faced police brutality. We faced troops in our townships. Activists and leaders were disappeared and assassinated. And at that time, it was routine for activists who were arrested to be tortured. Peaceful protest was criminalized. A gathering like this would never have been allowed because it was not lawful. Journalists were silenced, and all political opposition was criminalized. And in 1986, I was arrested, along with thousands of my comrades and fellow activists, and held under emergency laws in indefinite detention without trial. I was held first in solitary confinement in a very small police cell in the college town that I lived in. And then finally I was moved to a maximum security prison and interrogated on an almost daily basis. And it was during that time that I learned that the security police, the South African security police, were building treason charges against me, which carried an incredibly high penalty. The minimum sentence was 10 years, and the maximum sentence was 20 years. If I had not been white, I would have faced the death penalty. When I was finally released, I was issued with a banning order, which meant that I could only stay in my geographic location. I was banned from writing. I was a journalist. I was a researcher. I was not allowed to write. I was not allowed to speak. I was not allowed to be in gatherings of more than 3 people. And the most difficult part of it all was that I found myself in another prison, but it was an invisible prison, that I was having to police myself, and my friends were having to police me. We still had to wait several years before Mandela was released and the apartheid laws were overturned. And for me personally, I still had to wait several more years before I was allowed to marry my fiancé, who was not white, because marriage across racial lines was illegal. And now I find myself at JANM. And I'm telling you this story because it's important for you to understand who I am and why I am heading up what I think is one of the most extraordinary and important institutions in this country. Because I find myself at Janam now at this time of incredible divisiveness and uncertainty. We're once again witnessing the corrosive power of prejudice and discrimination, the return of explicit racism to public discourse, the shredding of truth, and the disastrous consequences of public policy when it's shaped by the politics of bigotry, hatred, and failed political leadership. If you remove the war hysteria, it's the very same climate that allowed the Issei and the Nisei to be swept up and imprisoned in concentration camps. It was this same climate that destroyed their communities, their livelihood, and stripped them of their dignity. In the last year, certainly the last year since I was at Manzanar, we've again seen the stripping of rights. We've again seen the stripping of constitutionally guaranteed rights, which are not privileges that can simply be bestowed or withheld. They're rights that are protected by the Constitution. "75 years ago, Americans stood by, silent and complicit, as your parents, your grandparents, and many of you here today were forcibly removed from homes and communities. You were stripped of your rights. It was the self-same prejudice and bigotry that is now spreading like a corrosive stain across this country that made the incarceration possible. Political leaders will change. They always do. And as surely as the sun will rise tomorrow, Trump will not always be president. And the wrongs will be righted. However, he may no longer be president. But what I fear more than anything else is the climate that he and his ilk have unleashed. It's a climate in which the language of prejudice is again becoming policy, in which truth is perverted, and racial hatred even makes racial violence permissible. We've seen Charlottesville. We've seen the neo-Nazis and the white supremacists marching. But, you know, they can be tamped down. They can be taken care of. But it's at the policy level. It's at the policy level where that is the most pernicious. And that's the most difficult to reverse. We're seeing the criminalization of immigration. We're seeing over 700 children have been separated from their mothers that are seeking to come into this country as migrants or refugees. This country has closed its doors. It's closed its borders to refugees, people who are seeking asylum. 11 refugees from Syria have been allowed to come into this country in the last year. The travel bans that we've seen and that may yet still be upheld by the Supreme Court. We're seeing again the exclusion and scapegoating of people based on race, religion, sexual orientation, and ability. And then most recently, we're seeing how the plans for the 2020 census, where you have to indicate your citizenship, we know that that's going to be weaponized as another form of exclusion and another way to cement differences and to keep people apart. In the face of this, none of us can afford to be silent. 75 years ago, only the American Friends stood up for Japanese American. Most of the country stood silent in their complicity. I'll never forget Archbishop Tutu saying to us all those years ago in South Africa, if you're neutral in the face of injustice, you choose to side with the oppressor. And he quoted an African proverb, which is, if an elephant has a foot on the tail of a mouse and you say you're neutral, the mouse will not appreciate your neutrality. When I look back on my own history, I feel so incredibly proud that I flew the flag of revolution, that I was able to be part of a movement that saw the liberation of my country, that brought the promise of justice and democracy and to the end to one of the most oppressive regimes of the 20th century. I was not much older than many of the young people who are gathered here when I started that journey. You know, I'm reminded as I was thinking about what I wanted to say, some of the words that Alan Nishio spoke at the Day of Remembrance at Janum just several months ago, and I thought that they were important enough to read to you. Because as we hear, we're at Manzanar, we're at this hollow, we're on this hollow, we're standing on hallowed ground, we're remembering redress. And he was talking about redress, and he was talking about how extraordinarily important redress was, and how it lifted the veil of silence. And so many of you have spoken about how your parents and your grandparents didn't speak about their experiences. And he said, it was something that we could talk about and became very important because the feelings of shame and embarrassment turned into feelings of righteous indignation and anger, and turned to a fighting spirit that understood that what happened to us was wrong, and we needed to do the effort to make it right. That was our community coming together. He also talked about what might have happened to the community if there hadn't been redress. How many of the Issei and the Nisei who'd passed would have done so without the sense of redemption. So it was an enormous, enormous coming together around a single goal. It was an enormous victory for human rights, and it was an enormous victory for civil rights in this community. And it wasn't just the redress. It wasn't just the fact of the coming together, but almost more important, almost equally important, was that it drew a line in the sand, it put a stake in the ground, and one that the American government could not ignore. And they were forced to apologize for the great wrong that they had done. So in South Africa, we had our Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which in many ways was very similar. All of us, whether we were white, or whether we were black, or whether we were Indian, we were all less whole because of apartheid. Black people suffered years of oppression, while most white people became less compassionate and less humane, and therefore less human. There was no redress. There was no redress. But we also stood. We stood with truth, because we were forced to look at the truth. We were forced to confront the history. And we were forced to forgive. Black people who'd been oppressed for hundreds of years forgave their oppressors with such extraordinary generosity of spirit. And if it hadn't been for that, our country would not have been allowed to come to terms with our past. We wouldn't have been allowed to recover our humanity, or to imagine a new beginning for ourselves. And I can only guess, I can only imagine that redress must have played the same role for the Japanese American community. We can't forget our past, because if we do, or if we try to bury it, we know that we're doomed to repeat it again. You know, I'm going to quote Archbishop Tutu again, and the reason I had the privilege of working with him, but he was so intrinsically central to that forgiveness, that truth and forgiveness and reconciliation moment in South African history. But he has this way with words, which you have to listen to very carefully often to what he's saying to understand the power. But there's one phrase that's really reverberated through my mind all these years, and it's, if we allow bygones to be bygones, there will be no bygones, because history will be repeated. So, thank you. I find myself at Janum, and one of the great lessons for me has been that Janum has always stayed true to its mission, and it always will. And that's to preserve and share history, to help people draw parallels between the past and today, to inspire our visitors to think critically and act ethically, and most importantly, to stand strong to ensure that no other group is similarly targeted, to learn from history to inform the present and to shape the future. And that's exactly what we're doing now. That's exactly what the work of the Manzanar Committee is. That's exactly the work of what these pilgrimages do. So it's an honor, it's a real honor to stand with all of you. So much of the work that we do collectively is rooted in the issues of democracy and civil rights, the fabric, the culture, and the values of democracy. The civil rights that were violated, that have been violated, that still need to be protected. The Japanese-American experience is about democracy, about the grave injustice that is committed, about the incredible valor of the Nisei soldiers who fought prejudice on two fronts. The terrible, terrible choice that the no-no boys had to make, and that they had to face with courage, and that they had to face the consequences with courage. It was also about standing together as one community to fight for redress and to ensure that the Constitution doesn't fail Americans again. And most importantly, you all stood together and you've made the rest of the country learn from your mistakes. I mean, not your mistakes, mistakes of the government, but you've also stood as a beacon for the rest of the world who care about justice and who care about human rights and who care about humanity. I cannot tell you how encouraged I am to see all of the young people who are with us today. At the risk of sounding ageist, at the risk of speaking down to you, forgive me if I do, but you inspire me. You inspire me every single day. We're all here. You're here. You're here on hallowed ground. You're here because you've come to remember. You've come to commemorate. But the most important way you can do that is to honor the history of your families, of your parents, of your grandparents, of your great-grandparents. And the way that you honor that history is to leave here, is to go out and be active, to participate, to engage. I know that you're here because you do that already, but go out and organize, protest, be activists, vote. For goodness sake, vote. You must keep your voices as loud as you can possibly make them. You have to remember that part of keeping your voice loud is to honor the sacrifice of the people that came behind you. But also remember that we're here, that redress happened because it wasn't just because of a loud voice, but it was because you got your statements right, you got the facts right. You stood on the side of fact and you had very, very strong arguments. Our collective work isn't done. We'll be much, much stronger if we do it together. And the last thing that I'll say to the young folks who are here, as surely as my generation fought the revolution in South Africa, your generation will lead the resistance, and we will win because of you, and we will all win because you will stand on our shoulders, and we will all win because we have right on our side. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Ann Burroughs, and for all that inspiration. I'd like to now introduce Ken Koshio.
金さぐぬ花や清水地に染めて親のよしごとやちむにすみ天昇り星や弓ばゆまりしが親のよしごとや弓やならんそう金さぐぬ花や清水地に染めて親のよしごとやちむにすみありがとうございます。Okay, now your time. So I'm going to sing Sukiyaki with you, okay? With you. With you. Susan, you too, all right? Okay, now clap your hand, please. Yeah. If you don't know Sukiyaki, just clap it. All right. Memories, good thing, bad thing, always in the music. Please let's sing together for the future people, you know? Ue muite aruko, everybody! Ue wo muite aruko, namida ga koporeないように思い出す春の日一人ぼっちの夜上を向いて歩こうにじんだ星を数えて思い出す夏の日夏の日一人ぼっちの一人ぼっちの夜幸せは雲の上に幸せは空の上に幸せは空の上に Come on everybody 上を向いて上を向歩こう涙がこぼれないようにこぼれないよ泣きながら歩く歩き 一人ぼっちの夜一人ぼっちの夜 Alright, pretty good. Whistling. Ready? Yeah, you guys practiced the last 10 years. Pretty good, guys. Hey. Hey. Alright, continue. 思い出す秋の日秋の日一人ぼっちの夜幸せは空の上に幸せは空の上に幸せは雲の上に幸せは雲の上に Okay, now everybody, seriously, I'm gonna yell karaoke, okay? Sing with me, or sing with my guitar. A one, a two, a one, two, 上を向いて Louder. I'm serious, man. 身がこぼれないよ泣きながらある一人ぼっちの夜一人ぼっちの夜 Okay, let's keep on singing Where We Gotta Go 上を向く歩こう Keep on, keep on 上を向いて歩こう Louder, louder Last time 上を向いて歩こうThat was a good karaoke for you guys. Thank you! Arigato! Please! Please! Thank you so much. Next.
Thank you, Ken. That was wonderful. It sounds like everybody really enjoyed that. Maybe we should have more karaoke. Okay, I'd like to introduce Bruce Embrey from the Manzanar Committee next. And here he is, the one and only.
That's the problem when you have family emceeing, you know. But I also then get to make a comment about Pat. You know, Pat was born here in Manzanar, right? And I know there's some other Manzanar babies in the crowd. And so we come here every year for a number of reasons. But one of the reasons why we come is to pay our respects and honor those who survived life behind barbed wire. And the babies are special. Manzanar had an orphanage, right? Only camp with an orphanage. But there's a number of people who are here today who are in camp, survived camp. And if you survived camp, or if you were born in Manzanar, like, where's Bill? I know Bill's out there. I'm going to call people out. So please stand, or if you can't stand, raise your hand so we can pay our respects. All right, Mas Okui. Mas Okui, Manzanar fisherman, member of the Congressional Advisory Commission that helped guide the founding and the creation of the Manzanar National Historic Site. Bill Watanabe is here, please. How many are here for the first time? Wow, that's a lot of you. That's a lot. Thank you. Welcome. So we honor those who survived life behind barbed wire. And we started coming here in 1969. It was driven by the Sansei who wanted to know what was going on, what had happened. Because most Nisei were not talking about what happened at camp. At least not really what happened. It was cryptic or in hushed tones. But so in 1969, we came here, and it was to teach right? So the committee was formed to teach and educate the broader public about what happened in camp. And it was an effort by those who actually had survived camp or were the direct descendants of those who were incarcerated. So Warren Furatani, my mother, Jim Matsuoka and Faye Matsuoka. Jim was here in Manzanar. Ryozo Kado-san was the stonemason who built that cemetery obelisk. He built the sentry houses that you probably drove past coming in here. And the importance of teaching young people about what happened here continues today. So what Lauren talked about, this project that we have, the Keeping Japanese American Incarceration Stories Alive. I know we got to come up with a better name. But the Nikkei Student Union is in the house, right? NSU. So NSU and the young people today, it's so important that they continue telling the story. Because as Ann Burroughs said, it's very, very relevant. So we had a very successful weekend, and we're going to do it again, and we want you to support that. We want to support the young people learning about what happened here and continuing to tell the story. But today we have a very specific reason for being here. The specific reason is that we want to celebrate the passage of the Civil Liberties Act of 1988, because when that law was passed, our country acknowledged the injustice of the forced removal and the incarceration of the Nikkei community. The President and the Congress apologized on behalf of the people of the United States and granted reparations, and more importantly, an apology. It was a long time coming, and it was far from perfect. Some 40,000 people who had lived behind barbed wire, who were forcibly removed, had died before this law was passed. My grandmother, two of my uncles, they had died before they received reparations or an apology for those lost years. But the Civil Liberties Act was the official recognition that the Executive Order 9066 was a result of race prejudice, war hysteria, and a failure of political leadership. And that was important, as Ambrose so eloquently pointed out. So how did we win? It's a cliche, it's a bit of a cliche, but it really truly was a people's movement. It's the only way to describe it. And for us, this movement began in 1969 with the pilgrimages to Manzanar. Buoyed by the civil rights movement and broader movements for social change in the 1960s, the Sansei and Yonsei were asking, and in many ways they were begging, to be told what happened. And eventually those who endured life behind barbed wire began to recount the traumatic events of 1942. At pilgrimages, at community forums and meetings, ordinary people recounted the shock, the humiliation, and the shame of being forced from their homes. But like Alan Nishio said and Anne recounted, these often painful memories of camp were transformed into stories driven by righteous anger and indignation that had been hidden for decades. And this righteous indignation was the essential foundation for the redress movement. Eventually, this people's movement combined with strong congressional leadership of people like Senator Inoue, Congressman Norm Mineta, Congressman Bob Matsui, and Senator Sparks Matsunaga. Senator Inoue was a particularly important figure because he personified the heroism of the 442 and of the veterans. And I know we have a number of veterans here today, and I think they deserve a special recognition. The heroism on the battlefield, the heroism exhibited from behind barbed wire by the draft resistors and those that said no, no, these stories were all powerful and drove our political representatives to act. The Japanese American delegation had very powerful and very important allies. In particular, Mervyn Dimely from California, Ron Dellums, and others from the Congressional Black Caucus provided the added moral and political power to get the Civil Liberties Act of 1988 passed. And the odds were not in our favor. The odds at that time were stacked against an apology, much less a recognition that our country had committed a racist act. So it's important that while we understand laws are passed in Congress, that we never forget that it was the telling of these stories by ordinary people that drove this movement and provided our political representatives with the moral authority. And our victory, however, won't be worth the paper it is printed on if we do not stand up when anyone else's civil or constitutional rights are threatened. The real reason of our long struggle for redress and reparations, the real lesson, is that our democracy is fragile and it must be defended at all times. Today, the threats to our democracy emanate from the very halls of power where the Civil Liberties Act of 1988 was passed. And as we gather here today, the president's Muslim travel ban is before the Supreme Court. You'd think or you'd hope this couldn't be happening in this day and age. But do not forget, the Supreme Court ruled against Fred Korematsu, Gordon Hirabayashi, and Min Yasui, and upheld EO 9066. Scapegoating entire communities for our country's economic problems or threats, supposed threats to our national security, unfortunately, it's a not new phenomenon in our country. And what's going on today is no different than what our families endured during World War II. So do not turn a blind eye. Stand up. Speak out. We cannot say shigataganai if our victory is to be meaningful and enduring. We cannot, we must not be silent. Thank you. We are going to honor a very important member of the Manzanar Committee. Wilbur Sato, who is right here in this chair, right below the stage, is receiving the Su Kunitomi Embrey Legacy Award. Wilbur, will you come to the stage, please? We want to invite Mayor Serta from Gardena, who is a good friend of Wilbur's, to be on stage while Wilbur accepts this award, and Wilbur will say a few words.
Am I up?
You're up.
I think this award is called what, the Baka Guts Award?
Baka Guts.
That's not me, that's why I put this on. It's not me, I'm not Baka Guts. Some people have called me Baka Guts at times, but that's not me. I want to thank the Manzanar Committee for this so-called award. Okay? But what I want to talk about is particulars. And it's going to, I'm depending on all of you people out there to take the particulars and use your imagination just to understand how the particulars affected the whole community. Okay, so listen carefully. Okay? But first thing first, Alan Nishiel's had a speech at the Day of Remembrance. All of you should have a copy of that speech in your family albums. It's something that everybody should have. Alan Nishiel's speech. Okay, think about it. The other thing is Ann Burroughs. I followed Ann Burroughs for years and years, and her great struggle for civil liberties. And I was really overjoyed when she became appointed to become the CEO of the Japanese American-Islamic Museum. We're very lucky to have her. She's very intelligent, great leader, and we're in good hands with her as the CEO, okay? But I was born in 1929, the year of the Great Depression. Thousands and thousands of people were out of work. People were begging in the streets. That's the first thing. And if you were Japanese American and you were poor, you didn't have medicine or doctors. You didn't have a lot of things. So when I was born in a home in Pasadena. And I could go back and say that home is still there. Still, very few people can do that. But that's not good because you didn't have any medical people. We had some lady who helped my mother, and I was a breech baby. So they pulled me out by the butt end, and in doing so, they injured my eye. So I ended up with one eye. I ended up with only one eye. Okay? So that's what happens when you're poor. You don't have medicines, doctors, you're poor. Okay? Not only that, but if you're Japanese American at the time, your father, for instance, if he was born in Japan, he could not become a citizen. He could not marry outside of the race. He could not own property. This is all law now. You guys this is individually. Now, how did this affect the community? Use your imagination, okay? The other thing is, if you were a citizen and you were married to a Japanese born in Japan, you lost your citizenship. That's the other thing, okay? And you couldn't marry outside of the race. So, and if you were Japanese American, the terrible menial jobs that you could have. You worked in during the summer or the spring picking fruit and vegetables, you know, and if you were poor and Japanese and you wanted to travel, for instance, to Oakland, you got in your car and you took a lunch. You took some lunch and you went halfway and you parked and you slept in your car. Why? Because restaurants could refuse to serve you. Hotels could refuse to let you give you a room. This was part of our way of life. Okay? And not only that, but blatant racism, and by the media and newspapers, Hollywood, so on. Japanese Americans were called all kinds of names, you know. It was not only called names, but there's violence, and it was terrible racism. So some of you don't know that. But these were terrible, terrible times for Japanese Americans. Then, what happened to us? We were put in places like Manzanar without being charged with anything, they took away our freedom, they took away our rights, and they said we're not American. This all happened to us. This all happened to us.
We have to give you the award.
Oh, he wants to give me the award. But no, but really. So this happened to us. But what happened after that? Like, for instance, the 2 world wars. The veterans started saying, look, we've been killed and wounded on the battlefield. We're going to fighting for our rights. We started having fair employment practices. We started having housing laws. We started having all kinds of civil rights fights. So, we got to the point where right now, for instance, in city councils all over the state, the people are elected, most of the people are elected en masse, right? The law now says they have to go by districts. That means more democracy. These are things that are changing, and democracy is winning. So you got to remember that. Trump is just a blip on the screen. He's not going to last, and democracy is going to win. Okay?
We want Wilbur's family to come up here, please. Wilbur's grandkids have flown in from Hawaii and Oregon and I believe North Carolina. So can they please come to the steps, and we're going to present the award to Wilbur on the steps, and we have a special presentation of a special lei from Hawaii.
Really?
Yeah, come on down. Come on down, and go on the steps. Let's come down so we can get pictures. Come on
Are we
down.
doing there too?
Come on down. All right. Okay.
Right there?
Okay, here. We're going to get this presentation.
Oh, my goodness.
Bruce, all the family face this way.
All right.
Come on, you guys.
Put the family up on the steps.
Harmony, Chris, Josh, Emerson.
Came from all over the country.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Thank you for coming to the Manzanar pilgrimage this year. I wrote an essay last year that meant a lot to me, and it shows how what happened to the Japanese Americans is still going on here, like everyone has been saying throughout this whole reunion. So, thank you. Good afternoon. I would like to thank my mom for opening the doors for me and guiding me through them. I would also like to thank my grandma for being the pillar to my family, my teacher for believing in me, extending my horizons, and giving me the opportunity that enabled me to be here, including all the effort he has put into bringing me here to this point. Last but not least, I would like to thank the Manzanar committee for giving me this wonderful experience. Thank you. If you guys don't mind, I would like to translate that to Spanish for my mom. Mamá, te quiero dar gracias una vez más por dejarme venir aquí, abrir mis puertas y guiarme por ellas. Te quiero dar muchas gracias porque tú eres alguien grande en mi vida. Te amo. Thank you. The title of my essay is Keep Our Families Together. Keep our families together. This is not only something the Japanese pleaded for when faced with Manzanar. It is a plea that is still as strong as when it started. A plea which is felt and voiced by thousands of immigrants being separated from their families, and a plea to which I can relate. During 1942, Japanese communities were being torn apart, just as immigrant communities now are being torn apart. Our new president has stated that Mexican immigrants are criminals and rapists, just like many government authorities thought that all Japanese were spies and against the country in which many were born in. Now, President Trump wants to start a mass deportation because of all the labels with which we are tagged without even knowing the reasons why we came here. And not knowing the harsh conditions immigrants go through in their native country. Even though families were sent to these concentration camps together, the family unit was often challenged over time. Rather than eating together as a single family, people ate in mess halls. The older children sometimes wanted to dine with friends. Oaths such as the no-no law, no-no questions, further divided families. These acts caused most of the separation of families within the camps. Moving a family by force can cause great harm. Similarly, families of immigrants today are forcefully being taken apart. My uncle came to the USA for a better life. After a while, he started a family, had children, and a wife. One day, the immigration patrol came and took my uncle away. In those moments and trials to his spirit, my uncle was deeply dejected. During the deportation process, my uncle lost contact with his wife and children. The second time he crossed the border, he arrived horribly malnourished. My uncle came to his destination full of cactus vines on his feet and back. When he arrived, he explained the excruciating journey he had endured. My uncle always wondered whatever happened to his family. He moved north to work as a picker in the fields. Little by little, he rebuilt his life. He met a nice and smart woman and got remarried. My uncle is still trying his best to locate his children so he can be reunited with them. The government's immigration policy often causes the separation of immigrants' families because they think they're doing the right thing, even though they're doing wrong. Even though they don't mean to split families apart, they do. Children who do nothing wrong often pay a brutal price. No matter what ethnicity you are, never let yourself be labeled with something you know isn't true. Japanese Americans weren't at all what the government labeled them, and they didn't let themselves be identified as that. Nor should you let yourself be identified by labels others put on you. Families should always be kept together because no matter how diverse our country becomes, the family units will endure and fill our lives with love and strength. Thank you.
So we have these student awards winners, and Jenny Chamori will introduce them.
If Emily Ota is out here, can you please come forward? And Sarah Omura. Okay, the Manzanar Committee Student Awards program recognizes students who demonstrate an understanding of the guiding principles of social justice and human and civil rights in our society today. These students have taken their time beyond their curricular year, and they have worked on projects, essays, poems, and the Manzanar Committee really wants to recognize them. I'm just going to read off the awardees for this year. We have a couple of them here at the pilgrimage, and we will be having a reception for them on May 19th. Okay, the division of pre-K to K grade level, the category of visual arts is Emma Cho. The division of 3rd through 5th grade, the category of visual arts individual is Emily Ota. Bring her up here, please. Category of written individual is Sharon Choi. Second place for written individual is Monica Mani. The category of written group project, first place is Victoria Yang and Hazel Quach. And the category of technology and electronic media is Sarah Omura. The division of 6th grade through 8th grade and the category of visual arts individual is Karen Ota. And the division of 9th through 12th grade category written individual project is Valerie Wu. Can we just give them a hand? And you can see their projects at MAD tonight.
Look right here. Wait, Mom wants a picture. Look over here.
る日忘れかけた僕の胸の内の宝物がここに現れた。あの日忘れかけてたすべてのことを思い出すために僕はここへまた戻ってきた。I am infinity, washing to the rhythms of your energy. From the beginning of time, there's only my mind, and now we're all together. Spinning in time, there's only my mind, and we are forever. Nothing's wrong, nothing's right. It's up to you. You feel like what you are, who you are. Everything is alright. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, yeah. Like an eagle, you can fly higher and higher and higher. You are the one, only one. I am infinity, washing through the rhythms of your energy. From the beginning of time and all my mind, and now we're together. Spinning the time and all my mind is real. Infinity, washing to the rhythms of your energy. From the beginning of time and all my mind, and now we're together. Spinning the times and all my mind, and we are forever. Da 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 da. Thank you so much. Arigato. 僕のじいちゃんやばあちゃんや ancestry, everybody, we are here together. So today for the future. Thank you so much. ありがとうございました。
For folks who don't know me, my name is Monica Embrey, and I am Sue's granddaughter and Bruce's daughter. And I'm going to finish this program by saying, Minna kite itadaite, domo arigatou gozaimasu. We're going to now do the camp roll call. Make sure all banner carriers. Please come forward. All banner carriers, please come to the front. So it's important as we're here at Manzanar to recognize this was not the only place that people were unconstitutionally incarcerated. Amache, Colorado, 10,295 incarcerees. Crystal City, Texas, 1,800. Gila River, Arizona, 16,655. Heart Mountain, Wyoming, 14,025. Jerome, Arkansas, 10,241.
Manzanar, California, 11,212. Minidoka, Idaho, 10,295. Poston, Arizona, 19,534. Rower, Arkansas, 11,928. Topaz, Utah, 11,212. Tule Lake, California, 29,490. And the 442nd and 100th Battalion, MIS. Thank you. The banner carriers are now going to walk towards the cemetery. We ask you to please follow them for an interfaith service. And after that, we'll have dancing. Thank you.